tears are wiped away, and all will hear the voice of gladness. There will come a time when the mountains flow with wine, and the world will hear the voice of bride and groom. And all who say, give thanks to the Lord of hosts, sing praise, for he is good, for his love endures forever. Yes, his love endures forever. Before we call, you will answer, and when we speak, you will hear. So day and night we will never hold our peace for the sake of Zion. We will not keep silent until the day her salvation blazes forth as a praise in the earth. Give thanks to the Lord of hosts, sing praise, for he is good, for his love endures forever. Yes, his love endures forever. We will gather, we will sing hallelujah on the mountain of the King. Hearts are pure and hands are clean on the mountain of the King. Cherubim and seraphim, hallelujah, falling down on bended knee. Hear the sound of melody, hallelujah, on the mountain of the King. Give thanks to the Lord of hosts, sing praise, for he is good, for his love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of hosts, sing praise, for he is good, for his love endures forever. Yes, his love endures forever. We will sing on the mountain of the King. We will sing on the mountain of the King.
I believe in Israel, and I believe in her people. The history of my nation can be traced through the mountains and the valleys of this land. But there is one mountain that is at the very heart of our story.
It is the mountain known throughout antiquity as the place where heaven meets earth. Located at the crossroads of 3 continents and elevated above the city of Jerusalem, it is called in the Bible the center of the world. According to legend, it was the location of the Garden of Eden, the very place where God took dust and breathed life into the first man. The Hebrews called this place Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, Mount Zion. It was where Abraham was led to offer up his son, and where God provided a ram in Isaac's place. It was the mountain purchased by King David, and where King Solomon built the house of God, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, and where the 12 tribes of Israel would worship, where Jesus celebrated the Jewish festivals, and where his first disciples came to pray. Conquered in war by the Babylonians and Persians, Greeks and Romans, Crusaders and Muslims, it is the most fought-over mountain in the history of the world. But the ancient prophets of Israel wrote of a different destiny for this place, a future that many believe is unfolding in our time.
We journeyed and trekked out into the wilderness before dawn to try to understand what it would have been like for God's presence to come, that glory which was on Mount Sinai. I feel like to truly understand the awesomeness of God's dwelling presence, you have to understand the majesty of what happened at Mount Sinai. God reveals himself to an entire people, and it's changed the course of world history forever.
The culmination of the Exodus story was not the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. The culmination was the outpouring of God's glory, his presence, his Shekhinah in Hebrew, on the tabernacle.
It's like no other story known to man. God chose a people and he showed up. You just have to use a little imagination and maybe just to feel it here in the desert of what could it have been like.
This concept of God's presence that's everywhere, I think that's a given. God cannot be contained. But at the same time, God gives Israel this command. You shall build me a house and I will dwell amongst them. And I find that to be so amazing, that the house is not to contain his presence, but rather for his presence to dwell within us.
It's a mystery how God can be everywhere at once and still dwell and reveal himself in a specific place. And he certainly chose to do that in the tabernacle.
My dream for the Temple Mount is for all the nations of the world to be able to come, join together, to be a gathering place for the Jews on high holidays, and really enjoy what Jerusalem is meant to be. I yearn for that day where I'm going to be able to ascend to Har Habayit with my whole family and rejoice and dance and be able to pray to God. on that mountain.
It is the blessing from God that has been recited over Israel for over 3,300 years. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Joshua's altar is probably one of the most significant yet untouched places. No one really knows what's going on there. Nobody visits it hardly at all. But yet it's one of these amazing locations that's one of the oldest. This is an incredible sight.
The melodies that once filled the air on Mount Zion were lost to time. But today, as the Jewish people return to the land of their forefathers, the ancient songs are being rediscovered. One of them is Psalm 118. Originally composed by King David, it is believed that this melody was sung by the Levites on the Temple Mount.
ענני במרחב, אדוני לי לא יירא, מה יעשה לי אדם? אדוני לי בעוזרי, ואני אראה בשונאי, טוב לך לעשות באדוני, בלי לטוח באדם. פיתרו לי שערי צדק, אבוא במודל, זה השער לאדוני, צדיקים יבואו בו.
Shiloh is so significant to the biblical narrative because it was a capital of Israel. And it took me a long time to see in the biblical story, but it was like a Jerusalem of sorts. The Ark of the Covenant was there for almost 400 years. This is where Hannah prayed for a son. It's where her son Samuel heard the voice of God. Shiloh starts the narrative, the story of finding the Messiah of Israel, the anointed king.
Over the course of recent generations, scores of prophecies foretold in the Bible have become a reality. But one promise yet to come is constantly in the hearts of the Jewish people. The promise of peace forever in the land of Israel.
My dream for this city is that there one day would be peace. And I can't wait for that day. David tells us in the Psalms to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And the reason is because what happens in this city literally affects the entire world.
When I see with my natural eyes this city today, I see also the promise that it will become the mountain of the King.
God's design for this mountain was to be a place of prayer, a place of worship, a place of dedication, of rededication, of coming to God and getting close. But when this city becomes a city of peace, we're going to experience God on this mountain like we've never in the history of mankind experienced God.
It says one day God will wipe away the tears from all our eyes. Death will be done away with from that mountain. It says when the King rules on Zion, the name of the city will be "The Lord is there."
I have a dream that one day I'll have the opportunity to take my young sons and my daughter and my wife up to the Temple Mount to serve God together as a family, collectively with all of Israel together. There's something about God's holy mountain that unites us. And that's my dream, is that we will collectively as a people come together as one and serve the King.